It was a humid Thursday afternoon when officers Daniels and Klein pulled over a black SUV with tinted windows that had rolled through a stop sign in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Washington, D.C. They had been bored for most of the shift, and any excuse to stretch their authority felt like a welcome distraction. As they approached the vehicle, a poised, middle-aged black woman rolled down the window. Her expression was calm, too calm for their liking. "License and registration," Daniels said sharply. The woman handed over her documents without a word. Everything was valid. Clean. But Klein spotted a government-issue badge clipped to her handbag and immediately rolled his eyes. "Oh great," he muttered, "another one of those who thinks flashing a badge gets her out of a ticket." Daniels chuckled. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." She hesitated. "May I ask why?" Daniels smirked. "You're being detained. Let's make this easy." Without waiting for an explanation, they pulled her out of the car and placed her in cuffs. She didn't resist. She didn't even protest. She just stared at them in silence. Inside the squad car, they mocked her quietly. What was her job title again? Klein snorted. She mumbled something about national operations. "Yeah, right," Daniels said. "She probably organizes office birthday parties at some agency." They both laughed. Until she turned to them and said calmly, "I'm the FBI director." To be continued. The car fell into an icy silence. Klein blinked like he hadn't heard her correctly. Daniels shifted in his seat and glanced at the rearview mirror, locking eyes with the woman now sitting quietly in the back of their cruiser. "Wait, what did you just say?" Daniels asked, his voice lower this time. "I said," she repeated clearly, "I'm the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation." There was no arrogance in her voice. No bluff. Just unwavering calm. A kind of calm that doesn't come from intimidation, but from authority. Klein let out a scoff. "Yeah, okay. And I'm the Secretary of Defense." She didn't flinch. Instead, she tilted her head slightly. "Open my phone. There's a secure contact labeled DOJ, direct line. Call it. Tell them you're holding Director Morgan Wells." Daniels frowned, the joke wearing off. "You're seriously going with this? Director of the FBI?" She leaned forward just enough so her voice carried clearly. "Do it. Because if you don't, the next call is coming from the Attorney General asking why your body cam shows you detaining a federal official without cause." Daniels glanced at Klein. Klein looked back at him, suddenly not so sure anymore. He pulled out the woman's government badge from her purse and flipped it over, studying it more carefully now. The seal was real. The clearance level was extreme. Her ID matched her face, and the photo was less than a year old. The title? Director Morgan Wells, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Klein cursed under his breath. No way, Daniel's hands went cold. He started mentally replaying everything that had just happened, every mocking word, every unnecessary command, every assumption they had made the moment they saw her. She hadn't once raised her voice. She hadn't even played the card early. She gave them every chance to back off, and they walked straight into it like amateurs. Wells leaned back again and calmly added, "You have 60 seconds to decide whether you're going to fix this, or whether this turns into a federal incident." Klein reached for the radio. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he stepped out of the car. To be continued. Daniels stood outside the cruiser, his hand resting on the roof of the vehicle as if steadying himself. The neighborhood was still quiet, birds chirping, a lawn sprinkler ticking in the distance, a painfully normal scene that now felt completely surreal. Inside the car sat the most powerful law enforcement official in the country, and he had just slapped cuffs on her like she was shoplifting chewing gum. He tapped his earpiece and radioed dispatch. Dispatch, this is Unit 4B requesting immediate supervisor assistance at our current location. We may have a situation involving a high-level government official. Possibly federal. Klein looked pale. He was still staring at the badge in his hand, now treating it like a live grenade. This can't be real. What the hell were we thinking? Director Wells remained composed in the back seat. She knew the panic would set in fast, and it had. Your body cams are rolling, correct? She asked coolly. Klein flinched. Yes, ma'am. Good. Then the footage will clearly show that I complied. That I identified myself. And that I was mocked and arrested without justification. That's going to be very useful later. Daniels opened the door and removed her from the back seat with far more care than before. Director Wells. We sincerely apologize. We didn't realize who you were. It was a misunderstanding. She turned to him slowly. No, Officer Daniels. It was an assumption. Those words hit harder than any outburst could have. Daniels looked away, swallowing hard. He began to remove the cuffs from her wrists, his hands shaking slightly. Wells rolled her wrists once they were free. Call your captain. Right now. Klein immediately grabbed the radio again. Dispatch, we need Captain Ortega at this location. ASAP. Tell him it's urgent. Moments later, a black government SUV came screeching onto the street. Two sharply dressed agents from the Bureau's Internal Affairs Unit stepped out. They walked straight to Wells, nodded respectfully, and then turned toward the officers. You two, one of them said coldly. Hand over your body cams. Now. Klein and Daniels complied without a word. This was no longer a routine traffic stop, it was now a full-scale investigation. Wells glanced back at the two officers. You're lucky I don't press charges. But make no mistake, this isn't over. I know how these things are usually buried, but not this time. She stepped into the SUV, the door closing behind her with a soft thud that somehow felt like a gavel slamming down. Captain Ortega's cruiser rolled up less than 10 minutes later. He stepped out the moment the tires stopped, his face already tight with tension. He was in his mid-50s, composed, experienced, but even he looked visibly rattled as he approached the two officers standing stiffly on the curb. What's going on here? He demanded. Klein didn't speak. Daniels stepped forward. Sir, we detained a woman earlier today, and we just learned she's the director of the FBI. Ortega blinked once, as if trying to make sense of the words. You what? She showed ID, Daniels stammered. We didn't believe it at first. We thought she was, well, maybe someone trying to bluff her way out of it. Ortega turned slowly to the federal SUV still parked across the street, where Director Wells remained inside with the Bureau's Internal Affairs agents. And you cuffed her? Yes, sir, Klein muttered, barely audible. Ortega's voice dropped to a near whisper. You arrested the director of the FBI, over a rolling stop, and then mocked her. Klein looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. She warned us, Daniels said quietly. We didn't listen. Ortega rubbed his temples and took a long breath. You have any idea the firestorm you just created? She could bring down this entire department with one press conference. Then he looked up, suddenly more furious than he'd ever been. She's not just some bigwig. She oversees every major operation in this country. She has the authority to open investigations into us. You think this is going to disappear quietly? Gentlemen, I guarantee you, your careers are now hanging by a thread. Just then, the SUV door opened. Director Morgan Wells stepped out, flanked by the two internal agents. Her posture was firm, her expression unreadable, but every move she made carried the weight of someone who had dealt with far worse and had no time for excuses. Ortega straightened up. Director Wells, on behalf of the department, I want to sincerely apologize for, she raised a hand. He stopped mid-sentence. I've already sent a report to the DOJ, she said, her voice calm but cutting. This isn't about me. It's about how easily two officers let their assumptions override judgment, training, and basic respect. If I were anyone else, this would have ended very differently, wouldn't it? No one responded. They didn't have to. She stepped past Ortega and looked directly at Daniels and Klein. I didn't pull rank because I wanted to see how far you'd go. You went all the way. A long silence followed. Then she nodded to her agents, and they returned to the SUV. As the doors shut, Ortega turned back to his officers. You better call your union reps and your lawyers. Captain Ortega marched the two officers back to their cruiser, his voice low and furious. You're both off duty. Effective immediately. Internal Affairs will be contacting you within the hour. Until then, don't speak to anyone. Don't post anything. Don't even breathe unless you're told to. Daniels looked like he was going to protest, but Ortega cut him off with a glare. Across the street, the black SUV carrying Director Wells pulled away slowly. No sirens, no drama, just quiet, deliberate departure. Like she already knew this story would unfold in headlines without her needing to lift another finger. Within an hour, it did. By sunset, the local news had picked up the incident. Sources confirm FBI director detained during routine traffic stop, officers under review. The phrasing was neutral, but the comments online were not. Clips of the arrest leaked by someone inside the department, complete with the smug laughter in the squad car, were already going viral. Daniels and Klein sat separately at the precinct, staring at their phones in silent dread as the footage played over and over again online, each replay hammering in their humiliation. Every joke, every comment, every smug smirk was being torn apart on social media. I didn't know, Klein muttered, almost to himself. I didn't know who she was, doesn't matter, Ortega snapped, now pacing. It was never about who she was. It's about how you treated her before you knew. Meanwhile, Director Wells sat in her office at the Hoover Building. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages from cabinet officials, calls from media outlets, even quiet notes of support from agents across the country. But she didn't answer any of them. She was reviewing transcripts, camera footage, and the personnel files of Daniels and Klein. Not out of spite, but out of principle. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting a precedent. About making it impossible for others to ignore the silent decay within certain departments that relied too heavily on fear and too little on professionalism. Wells made one call, to the Attorney General. I want this handled internally, she said. No press conference. No grandstanding. Just accountability. And policy reform. Across the board. The Attorney General agreed. Back at the precinct, Ortega looked down at his phone, pale. It's official. You're both suspended without pay. Investigation pending. Daniels slumped into the bench. Klein looked like he was going to throw up. And Director Wells? She went back to work. As usual. The next morning, the station was under a media lockdown. Reporters circled like vultures outside the gates, demanding statements. Inside, tension gripped every hallway. Officers whispered. Doors closed more quietly. No one wanted to be the next headline. Daniels and Klein sat in separate interrogation rooms, each facing a cold, silent screen. The Internal Affairs investigators weren't local, they were bureau. Serious. Professional. The kind of people who didn't blink twice and wrote everything down. Across from Daniels sat Agent Monroe, known in D.C. as the Cleaner. She wasn't there to comfort him. She was there to document every decision he made, every opportunity he had to de-escalate, and how he failed. She slid a printed image across the table. It was a still frame from his own body cam. Director Wells, calm, hands visible, mid-sentence. Do you recall what she said right before you decided to put her in cuffs? Monroe asked. Daniels didn't answer. Monroe tilted her head. You're not just facing disciplinary action. There's a potential civil rights lawsuit on the table. Your cooperation, your honesty, may determine whether you have a future in law enforcement. Or if this is the end of your career. Meanwhile, in the other room, Klein was already cracking. I didn't mean to disrespect her, he stammered. I thought, she had an attitude, that's all. I didn't think she was serious. Agent Torres sat motionless across from him. You thought someone carrying federal credentials was lying? Why? Klein swallowed hard. I assumed it was fake. She didn't look like, he stopped himself. Didn't look like what? Torres asked sharply. Klein froze. Back at the bureau, Wells watched both interviews through a live encrypted feed. Her expression didn't change. This wasn't about punishing them. It was about what their reactions revealed. Assumptions. Arrogance. Complacency. Things that had been overlooked for too long, until the wrong person ended up in the back of the cruiser. Wells turned to her deputy. I want a new joint training initiative, local departments and federal agencies. Starting immediately. They need to understand who they're dealing with before things escalate. The deputy nodded. You want them re-educated? No, she said firmly. I want them awakened. By noon, the Bureau released a single official statement. The incident involving Director Morgan Wells is under full investigation. We are working closely with local authorities to ensure accountability and to prevent future breaches of protocol. The director is cooperating fully and remains committed to public service. No drama. No theatrics. Just facts. And a clear message, this time, someone was watching. Within 48 hours, the story had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer just a local incident, it had become national news. Cable networks ran endless loops of the body cam footage. Headlines ranged from FBI director wrongfully detained to officers mock top federal official before realizing who she is. Talk shows debated what it said about policing. Social media was on fire. But the most surprising response came from within law enforcement itself. Several police chiefs, including ones from neighboring states, issued open letters of support for Director Wells. They praised her calm restraint. Some even admitted they were initiating policy reviews in their own departments after watching what had unfolded. Daniels and Klein, meanwhile, had been advised to stay silent. But that didn't stop the internet from digging. Old photos, past complaints, and questionable social media posts began resurfacing, painting a picture of two officers who had operated with too much freedom and too little oversight for too long. Behind closed doors, city officials were panicking. The mayor scheduled an emergency meeting with the chief of police and senior council members. Public confidence in the department was spiraling, and upcoming elections meant damage control wasn't just a necessity, it was a political imperative. We need a statement from Director Wells, the mayor urged. Something that cools this off. But Director Wells had other ideas. She declined every interview request. Every media appearance. Every attempt to turn her experience into a spectacle. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She visited the local police academy. In a quiet, closed-door session, she addressed over 100 cadets, future officers. No cameras. No speeches. Just truth. I wasn't detained because I was dangerous, she said. I was detained because they didn't see value in me. They made decisions based on assumptions, not facts. If you walk out of here doing the same thing, your badge will do more harm than good. The room was silent. She paused, then added, your job isn't to be feared. Your job is to protect, without bias, without pride, and without excuses. Earn that badge. Every day. The next morning, the cadets gave her a standing ovation when she left the building. That moment didn't make the news. But word spread fast. And suddenly, across the country, conversations inside precincts started to shift. Director Wells hadn't just exposed two careless officers. She'd sparked a reckoning. Back at the precinct, Daniels sat alone in the break room, except it wasn't a break. It was more like a slow, silent countdown to a career-ending announcement. His badge had been placed in a sealed envelope that morning. The union lawyer had warned him, best case scenario. You resign. Worst case. You're terminated and blacklisted. He glanced at his phone. Voicemails. Missed calls. A few supportive texts from friends who still believed it had all been a misunderstanding. But the truth weighed heavier than excuses now. Across the building, Klein had already cleared out his locker. He didn't say goodbye to anyone. Didn't look up. His nameplate was gone before the end of the hour. By noon, Captain Ortega delivered the official verdict to a silent press room. After a full internal investigation and consultation with the Department of Justice, Officers Daniels and Klein have both submitted resignations. These were accepted and will take immediate effect. Additional department-wide reforms are now underway. No applause. No questions. Just a quiet exhale from a city that had been holding its breath. But the ripple didn't stop there. The police chief announced new monthly scenario-based training sessions with federal oversight. Officers would now be tested on de-escalation, ID validation procedures, and most importantly, bias recognition. A reform package was fast-tracked and passed unanimously by the city council within a week. Meanwhile, inside the Hoover building, Director Wells sat at a long mahogany table, finalizing the blueprint for a federal initiative aimed at bridging gaps between local law enforcement and federal agencies. It would be called Operation Clear Sight. The pilot would begin in 3 states, each with high-profile incidents in the past decade, and would bring agents, officers, and civilians into shared simulations where assumptions were exposed, challenged, and corrected. A young analyst across the room raised a hand. "Ma'am, will you personally be involved in the rollout?" Wells looked up. "I already was." The room went quiet with understanding. She didn't need to stand in front of cameras or hold press conferences. She had lived the lesson. And now she was using it. Meanwhile, in a quiet neighborhood just outside the city, an older woman sat in her living room watching a news segment on her television. She shook her head and muttered to herself, "About time someone turned the system on its head." The screen showed Director Wells walking into a town hall meeting. Not with agents, but with the community. It was a crisp Friday evening when Director Morgan Wells walked into the packed community center in southeast D.C. The room buzzed with conversation, residents, faith leaders, retired officers, youth counselors, all seated together, waiting for her to speak. But Wells didn't start with a speech. Instead, she opened the floor. One by one, people stood and shared their experiences, some painful, some hopeful. Stories of being dismissed, misunderstood, overlooked. Stories of moments where trust in the system had cracked, sometimes shattered. Wells listened to every word. She didn't interrupt. Didn't deflect. She let the room breathe. When she finally spoke, it was with clarity, not authority. You don't rebuild trust with press releases. You do it with consistency. With showing up, even when it's uncomfortable. She paused, then added, "The badge I wear doesn't make me immune from being misjudged. But it does give me the responsibility to ensure no one else has to pay for someone else's assumptions." The crowd nodded. There were no cheers, just heavy, silent agreement. The kind that marks the beginning of something real. Later that night, Wells walked alone through the quiet halls of the Bureau, passing portraits of former directors, mostly men, mostly distant from the people they served. She stopped at her own door, looked at the brass nameplate, and took a deep breath. She wasn't just leading an agency anymore. She was reshaping it. Across town, Daniels packed the last of his belongings into a cardboard box. No one said goodbye. But maybe that was fair. Klein had already applied for a civilian job, hoping the internet would eventually forget. But the world hadn't forgotten. It had learned. In the weeks that followed, departments around the country began replicating Operation Clearsight. Complaints about excessive stops and procedural misuse dropped in test areas. New recruits began citing Wells' town hall appearance as their inspiration. Change didn't come all at once. But it had started. And at the center of it stood a woman who never raised her voice, never lashed out, but who made an entire nation pause, rethink, and adjust its course. Not with force, but with the quiet, immovable power of truth. 3 months had passed. Director Morgan Wells stood before a new graduating class of FBI agents. Her tailored navy suit was sharp, her presence commanding, but it wasn't the uniform or the title that held the room. It was the weight of everything she had endured, and transformed. She looked out at the eager young faces. Some were former military, others straight from universities, a few with backgrounds in local enforcement. All of them had studied the incident that brought Wells into the headlines, but more importantly, they had studied what happened afterward. "This badge," she said, holding hers up briefly, "is not a shield from criticism. It's not a pass to exert power. It is a contract, with every citizen in this country. And that contract is fragile." She stepped forward. 3 months ago, I sat in the back of a squad car in cuffs. Not because of what I did, but because of what someone assumed I was. That moment changed more than my afternoon, it changed this agency. It changed you. The room was silent. Being underestimated was nothing new. But that day, it became a catalyst. And now, you are the continuation of that shift. As the ceremony closed, applause thundered through the Bureau's atrium. Cadets lined up to shake her hand, not just out of respect, but because they believed in the change she embodied. Outside, news vans still occasionally waited for her, hoping she'd give them something sensational. But Wells always smiled politely, nodded, and walked past. She wasn't here for sound bites. She was here to build something that would outlive her name. At home that night, she sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching the dusk settle over D.C. Her phone buzzed with updates, new reforms passed in 3 states, an internal department that had just adopted Clearsight protocols, and a letter from a small-town police chief thanking her for waking his officers up. She placed the phone down, exhaled, and let the silence wrap around her. Not every battle ends in court. Not every war is fought in the open. Some are won by holding the line. By refusing to be shaken. By changing the system from within. And Morgan Wells had done just that. Not with noise. But with unwavering resolve.